Okay, welcome to my Highfleet after action report. This is a video that I put together just to go over some of the things we've learned from the campaign, and I'll just talk about a few things. I've got a couple of these I want to produce. This is a very technical one. Before we start, I was looking through the game files to get some images to use in this presentation, and I noticed the one that I've got on the screen here, which is of a remaining officer reading a pillar covered in text in some sort of control room. As far as I'm aware, this image is not actually used anywhere in the game, but that's very clearly, as far as I'm concerned, the pillar that Piotr wanted us to read at the end of the game. So it's very interesting that is actually there, and there may be an event that was cut where you read the pillar. I am going to do a separate lore video where we'll go into some more detail, but I just want to let people know that that existed. But this video is going to be a technical and strategic after action report. So we're not going to talk about the campaign in terms of the story of the campaign or how we engage the campaign. What we're going to talk about is some quick facts about the campaign. I'm going to go through the ships that we used that made a big impact on the game and what we've learned from those ships, what performed well, what didn't perform well. We're then going to look at some facts about the hard mode campaign that we're looking to play, and we're going to put all that information together into a fleet proposal. And I want to show you what I'm planning to put together in my design videos, which are coming up. And there's a few other notes that I'm going to go through. In the next video, I'm going to do a campaign after action report, if there's sufficient interest in it, where I'm going to talk about, it's probably not going to be very long, but just the steps that we took to get through the campaign, what events that were really good in that campaign, like taking hidden cities, and what events really didn't work out for us at all. Once I've done that, I also want to do a video about the lore of the game, because there's a few people who've been wanting to talk to me about that. I've been having some really great conversations in video comments about it as well. Some interesting notes about the campaign just before we get started. It took 39 days in-game, according to our save file, for us to complete our mission, which I thought was pretty quick. I expected it to be much longer than that, especially with how long it took to refit the Sevastopol, but that's pretty good. We did that in 36 videos, was how many I produced for the actual campaign, most of which were around about 35 minutes to 40 minutes. Some hit 50 and a couple were a bit less than that. We started the campaign, I posted the first video on the 22nd of August, and the final video was on the 21st of November. So it was roughly 3 months of actual creating videos and playing games to actually get us to that endpoint, which is a pretty decent chunk. I think I got my money's worth from Highfleet. If you're ever concerned, here's a channel where someone got their money's worth from Highfleet. I'm going to play it again, so definitely a good investment from me. Moving on though, we're going to talk about ships. So the first ship I want to talk about is the good old Sevastopol. The Sevastopol is a ship I've spoken about at length before. It's a ship that I'm not particularly fond of. It is a great ship to look at. I think it really fits the aesthetic of Highfleet so well. I love that fake bridge. The sensor tower that comes out at the top of the ship. I think that looks really impressive. It looks like a really scary ship, but it's not. It's, as we talked before, it's very slow, and that's its biggest hindrance. It only has a max top speed of 90 kilometers per hour, which is it might as well not exist as far as I'm concerned. It has lots of very exposed, expensive components. All of the sensors on that sensor tower are both redundant and expensive to lose. The ELINT sensor on the left-hand side is blocked from being operating on the right hand side, and then there's another ELINT sensor on the far right, which means that smaller one is ineffective. There's multiple fire control radars on there. There's also fire control radars on the bottom of the ship. I've highlighted some glaring weak points. So I've already talked about the sensor tower. On the left there, we have two missile pods for tactical missiles, which start off the game as nukes, which is useful, but that also exposes a glaring hole in the armor of the ship, both straight down towards one of the guns, which I haven't even talked about the fact that that gun is recessed into the ship so it cannot fire forward. There's also lots of ammo around it, so sufficient shots coming straight down or bombs or missiles coming in there can detonate all of that ammo. But it also gives someone coming in at a 45-degree angle straight shots into the fuel tanks, and incendiary ammo can set them on fire, and it isn't that hard to get at the bridge of the ship either. On the right-hand side, I've also highlighted the fact that we've got a missile battery there, which is not armored at all, and you've got another situation where someone firing from above can not only destroy those missiles, but can also get in and damage not only that fuel tank, but also all of the forward-firing guns that are there as well. It is armored on the bottom, which is quite good, but there are holes obviously let the thrusters through. It's just totally under-engined. It's a slow ship. It's too expensive. We've learned a lot from the Sevastopol from this campaign, and the biggest lesson that we have learned is we're not going to take it with us on our next campaign. Now, a ship that I did quite get a lot of good times with was the Remorseless, but it still had its problems. It took too long to come up with this design, which was obviously a refitted Sevastopol. It was very expensive to perform this rebuild, and we wasted a lot of time having to hunt down components to finish the job. It took a very long time, like I mentioned before. It was, however, a good ship. When I actually got it into combat, it did the job it was supposed to do. It took towns, it didn't really take a lot of damage, the armor worked really, really well, but there were some things that didn't work particularly greatly with it. We obviously had that elevated gun at the back of the ship. One thing I just want to point out is we're moving to 1.14 for the hard mode campaign. That kind of trick isn't going to work. I'll go into that in more detail later, but just elevated guns will not be able to fire over fuel tanks unless you do a lot of more work to elevate them. It's made it quite difficult. Going to that point at the top of the ship, the bridge was still quite exposed on this build, and sufficient armor-piercing fire, especially from something like a Gladiator, would probably have drilled through that one layer of armor and those ordinary hull pieces to take out the bridge quite quickly. The double-layered hull that I've got, the double-layered armor, really had no use. It was just a waste of money, a waste of time, and a waste of weight. What we should have put in there was just more reinforced hull behind that, because if you think about the size of the Remorseless, it's not like a smaller ship where you want to make every piece of armor count as much as possible. There's such a large surface area that shots aren't going to hit the same place over and over and over again. You can afford to have one layer of armor if your ship is big enough, in my opinion. Just looking at the front of the ship, we obviously had those 3 double-barreled guns. It's going to be a recurring theme. I really dislike that weapon. No problems with the caliber of round that it fires. I just find that the refire rate and the reload rate on them is very, very slow, and it really throws off my aim, and the projectile speed actually is quite slow on that size of shell, and that throws me quite badly. A couple of other points about the Remorseless before I move on. The 2 engines at the front of the ship are far too close to the edge of the hull. There's only one thin layer of armor there between them and the front of the ship. That side of the ship, the sides take a lot of fire. It doesn't take very long for an enemy just to, through sheer attrition, get rid of that armor and knock those 2 engines out, and that severely impacts the ship's maneuverability in combat. Obviously, we've got along the bottom of the ship quite a lot of thrusters that are protected by hull and armor. That, again, I don't know if I mentioned that in the previous slide, but that's not going to be possible in 1.14. So this type of build is actually completely invalidated by the new patch. So if you enjoyed seeing the Remorseless in action, I'm sorry to say that it is going to be put into the hangar, and it's probably not going to see the light of day again, because the brave new world that we're moving into is not one that this ship can survive in. There are some things that I will take away from this ship. I've never really fought with a really big battleship in this game before. I've always stuck to smaller ships, and the feeling of power flying this ship was great. The sound of its cannons firing was fantastic. It felt good to fly. So I'd like to revisit that at some point, but we're probably never going to get this big again. I just don't think it is worth the money, the time, and just the sheer investment of everything to get it up and running. Speaking of good capital ships, the next ship I want to talk about is the Varyag. So we were very lucky, and we are very lucky to have gotten our hands on this ship in the campaign. It's usually in the game as a boss. You might remember from some of my earlier videos when we were dealing with Strike Group Varyag, I was very scared of encountering one of these ships, and that's for a good reason. It has 4 6-barreled 130mm cannons. 180mm cannons. They're insanely powerful. You saw how fast the refire rate on them was. The loading on them is really good as well. I can't remember if they're elevated or not. I don't believe they are. And even if they currently are, in 1.14, they will not be elevated enough to fire past those fuel tanks. So the firepower, if it was available before, will be halved. It does not have that many flaws. It has some good sort of armor cushions around the engines on the left and right side, if you can see. So they're sort of up inside the superstructure of the ship and protected by armor, while still keeping most of the lower ship protected. We have a huge missile battery underneath, and that's a better place to put it. You take less fire from below than you do from above, so there's less chance of those missiles being destroyed. And unlike the Sevastopol, we have a layer of armor behind those missiles so that nobody can drill through anyway. It has a healthy complement of anti-air defenses as well. It still has some downsides, the main one being it has that sensor tower again, and as soon as you get into combat, it just acts like a shot trap, and that will take so much fire. Shots will clip through it, and you'll lose all of those sensors. I mean, that's a be there no matter what if you've got sensors on a ship. But my thought is, let's not put expensive sensors on frontline ships. Let's put them on support ships that can protect those very valuable and fragile pieces of equipment, and let these ships get into the fight. That has reminded me of something, however. Going back to the Remorseless very quickly, one thing that I did not like about this ship was its complete lack of sensors. It needed just a throwaway elant on it or something or an IR sensor, just so that I could keep track of things around me. I did feel very blind flying this ship without a Skylark along with it. So that is one thing. Always make sure you have a sensor, even if I don't really want to put sensors on these bigger ships. Moving on to our last big capital ship I want to talk about. The last one is the Nomad. The Nomad is a ship that I feel ended up doing a lot more than I intended it to. It actually took the brunt of a lot of the fighting at the end of the game, especially the actual brawling with its single 6-barreled 180mm gun, which is very well elevated, as you see. I think that might be elevated enough that in the next patch it can still fire over those fuel tanks. I'll have to test to find out. But the ship itself is it's trying to do too many things, just something Sevastopol is trying to do as well. You've noticed it's got the 2 strategic missile launchers on it. It's got 1 gun that can fire backwards, so if you attack it from behind, it's a lot weaker. It has IR sensors underneath. It's just trying to do too much. And I think that's a big problem with a lot of the vanilla builds. They try to do too much, and then they're not good enough at any one thing. It's also, unfortunately, very slow. It's not very maneuverable, and it just suffers a lot from the same things that I've talked about with the Sevastopol and the Varyak. But we can learn from these ships, and I am intending to. But also, it's just quite lightly armored. And I've got the top left-hand indicator there is showing that, again, a shot in from the top angle at 45 degrees in will not only destroy that Elint dome, but it only has to go through 1 hull piece to hit the bridge, which will wipe the whole ship out. So remember, you're fighting a Nomad, attack it from the top left-hand corner, and you should be able to take it out pretty quickly. Leaving behind our capital ships, I want to talk about some of our smaller ships. And the first one is one of the best ships that we had in the campaign, one of my favorite ships to fly in Highfleet, the Lightning. Or, well, I pointed out the Rooster. We had other Lightnings, but the Rooster was the one that kind of got a lot of people's attention. It was the best Lightning that we had for the longest period of time. I don't think anyone can argue with me when I say that the Lightning punched way over its weight. The 2 that I took at the start of the campaign took so much territory on their own. They really helped us establish a strong foothold that brought us into the mid-game in a strong position. I really like the Lightning from a design perspective as well. It teaches new players some really good concepts about ships and gives them space to experiment. For one thing, we were able to refit ours from having dual AK-100s to D-80 Molots without needing to change any other modules. It slows the ship down slightly, and that's it. And I really like that refit. It's a very simple refit. You'll notice on the sides of the ship, and I've got them highlighted with the leftmost of the pointers, there is hardpoints already built for you to attach missiles to. So you can really easily pick up on the fact that the missiles go here. The other thing that this ship has that you'll notice a lot of the other vanilla ships do not have as I go through them, especially the smaller ships, it has static downward-facing thrusters. And those thrusters are actually one of the things that gives the Lightning such high speed and make it such a powerful interceptor, is along with the gimbaled engines, which are very important for getting around in combat, those downward-facing thrusters give your ships really good distance, they give them good range, and they give them good fuel efficiency. And it's one of the reasons the Lightning performs so well. Sadly, thanks to 1.13, this ship is no longer going to be very good. Prox Fuse really just ruins this ship. It's so easy to clip it with one of those shotgun blasts. A lot of many ships can fire it now against this ship. And I just don't think that going into our hard mode campaign in patch 1.14 with a Lightning will get us very far, as much as I would love to. I also just want to say that from a very personal perspective, flying this ship for me feels like joyriding. I love going so fast my crew almost blacks out. I love stopping in midair, firing an entire clip at somebody and then just zooming off again. I feel like a little wasp pecking away at a big enemy. I just really enjoy that gameplay. A ship that did not perform very well for me and a vanilla design I really dislike after playing through this campaign is the Jaguar. I thought I would like the Jaguar. On paper, it looks very good. It's got those 2 big chunks of armor on either side with missile launchers on the outside. It has Palash. It has a double-barreled 180mm gun, which I really like the idea of, but it lacks a lot of very important things. The first thing I want to point out is on the vanilla build, I've got 3 pointers here. The first pointer on the left at the top, those engines are far too close to the edge of the ship, and this is a recurring theme we're going to see in other ships. So one of the things that flying a Jaguar taught me, and a few other ships, is you can't put your gimbaled engines that close to the edge of a ship. It's very easy for them to be destroyed. Another problem this ship has is at the top in the middle, that's where the bridge is. You can't have a ship's bridge there. It's so easy to destroy the bridge on this ship and just render it combat ineffective. And finally, well, actually there's 2 more points, but they're covered by that lower dot. The ship doesn't have any downward-facing thrusters, And I really struggled with this ship, especially towards the end of the campaign when I had big fleets, because its fuel efficiency was terrible and its top speed was terrible because it lacked those, what I would want to call strategic thrusters. It also only has one 37mm gun for close-in weapon support, and that just isn't enough firepower to deal with incoming missiles as far as I'm concerned. I need two. I did attempt to refit it into a better ship if you look at the Jaguar on the right-hand side, and honestly, I think it was a failure. I added the downward thrusters, which did increase its fuel efficiency, but I didn't add enough fuel tanks to really get the decent range I needed out of that. I added some armor to the top, which was sorely needed. I did not armor those top two engines. I just put some reinforced structure there, and we ran into the same problem again, where once it took a little bit of fire, it would lose those engines just through attrition, and then it would lose its maneuverability, and at that point it becomes very difficult to fly and starts to get destroyed very easily. So I feel like this ship was a bit of a boondoggle. It was slow, had bad fuel efficiency. I want to avoid the Jaguar in the future. It's too hard to refit for me. The Thunder was a ship that I spent a lot of time on. I made a video about it on a separate playlist on YouTube. I posted about it in the Reddit. I got a lot of negative comments about it on the Reddit, which was a bit disappointing. I wanted to create a intermediate Lightning/Gladiator ship, heavy firepower, high speed, great fuel efficiency, good armor, just the whole package. What I ended up with was an over-engineered, over-gunned, over-expensive ship that was fine. It did the job I needed it to do, but a smaller ship with less weapons, less armor, but a stronger thesis behind its creation could have done what it did with less hassle. I also feel that this ship really did not get to shine before it died. It was wiped out in an airstrike, and I was really sad about that because I was really excited for it. Some notes that I want to talk about before we leave the ship behind. I liked the side armor, the sort of the 4 quarters of armor that kind of covered sections of the ship, and I might revisit that design for 1.14. Rather than fully armoring around the outside of a ship, having spaced armor like that may discourage the enemy from firing AP rounds and get them to use something else and hit reinforced armor with weapons. I want to try that out. The ship really needed armor on top, and I think I added that during the campaign, but that's something that's important. I have 4 downward-facing thrusters in this ship to give it really high top speed and efficiency, and I was able to mount those inside the superstructure using an elevation trick, which is not available in 1.14. That's been taken out of the game, so we can't build this exact build again. Additionally, 6 D80 monauts is ridiculous. A ship doesn't need that many guns, especially a ship this size. I think it could have done just as good a job with 3 or 2, and then also some 37mm guns to shoot down incoming missiles. That's a big flaw in the design that I definitely want to correct if I have something similar to this in our next campaign. But the Wifflebat was a good ship. It just died before its time, and it was fine at what it did. Just to reiterate, though, it was over-engineered and overgunned. A ship that really surprised me in this campaign and that I really kind of fell in love with was the Paladin Mark II. We were very lucky to get a Paladin Mark II off of Tarkhan right after the Rooster was destroyed, and we were rebuilding our Jaguar. I ended up doing a refit on it as well. Again, we'll start with the vanilla version. It does have some weak points. It carries a lot of missiles, but those missiles are not armored or protected in any way, and they lead straight down to the bridge, so again, shots from above are very dangerous on this ship. It has that double-barreled gun that I dislike again. I just don't like the rate of fire, the reload speed, and the projectile speed on it for a fast ship. I just find my brain can't get around it, so that's a problem for me. It also has none of those downward-facing thrusters that I think are so important. So the vanilla version's biggest weakness really is it has slow speed, bad fuel efficiency, bad range. The version that I created used the trick again to elevate 3 downward-facing thrusters inside the ship, which would massively increase its range and fuel efficiency. I created an armored shell around it, which attracted a lot of AP rounds, but honestly performed very, very well. And I was just trying out that layer of reinforced armor and standard hull along the top of the ship just to see how that performed, and I think it did okay. And I also could mount missiles back in there at times, which I did do. Downsides to this design: the engines again are too close to the outsides, which is something you need to be. It's difficult to manage because you need your engines on the outside of the ship in order to give it enough thrust when you turn it. You need to do it from a good pivot angle. If you put them too close to the middle, they don't do very much. But at the same time, if the ship takes a heavy hit on one side, you end up losing an engine. And the actual end game Paladin that we was missing 3 of these gimbaled engines because I didn't have time to replace them, and they kept getting blown off in combat. So that's something to bear in mind with. However, I was very impressed with the Paladin Mark II. The armament that it had, 2 D-AT Molots, 2 37mm guns, may be the best weapon loadout for a ship in the game at this size. I want to talk about another ship that I built just shortly. The Zero Sum was my attempt at making a Lightning 2.0 without any armor. It's another example of an over-engineered ship. I don't need 5 D-AT Molots on it. Putting 1 37mm on it, we've spoken before, not enough seaways. The fuel tanks were far too exposed, the engines were far too exposed, it had absolutely no armor, it died very, very quickly, and you can see why. If you think about all the lessons we've already talked about from earlier ships, you can see why this ship failed to do what it needed to do. Unfortunately. 2 ships that performed admirably in this campaign, and they themselves didn't really do very much, was the Wasp and the Longbow. These ships brought to the table fighters, both in subsonic and supersonic forms, that were able to be multi-role. They did a whole ton of stuff for us this campaign. I was really, really impressed with them. And going into hard mode, I'm definitely going to lean on aircraft quite heavily. I find that they really punch above their weight. As long as you can protect their home base and make sure they get home with enough fuel, then they are excellent. And I'm very, very happy with how these sorted themselves out. We've got a couple more ships to go through. The Fennec is a complete failure for me in what I wanted it to do in the campaign. I bought it at the start of the game intending it to perform 2 roles within my fleet. 1, protect the Sevastopol from incoming nukes. It was terrible at that. 2, I wanted it to operate independently from the fleet and use its fire control radar to act as a forward radar post to help guide radar lock missiles in on targets. It failed every time I tried to do that. One of the main reasons for that was it has 2 gimbal thrusters and that's it. So it's slow, it's fuel inefficient, and it has poor range. So it always had to have a tender ship with it when it did that, and that kind of defeated the purpose of having one small ship flying out to do that on its own. So the Fennec for me was a complete failure. I'm sad about that because I like the idea of a little, AA ship, but it really didn't do the job it needed to do. And that's taught me some things about our doctrine for the next campaign. Finally, very quickly, the Skylark, great ship. Honestly, one of the best vanilla designs in the game. Whoever designed the Skylark did a great job because not only did they create a tanker, they filled it full of passive sensors, they made it fast, they gave it great range, they gave it great fuel efficiency. It is great. And I want to take the Skylark and just elevate it for this campaign. That's one of the ships that's not going to change that much. So we've gone through all of these ships. Now we can talk about the campaign that we're going to be running and what we've learned from our previous campaign to prepare for this campaign. So some information we need before we start. Obviously, I'm designing a custom fleet. I want to design all of my ships from scratch. I want it to have a unified theme in terms of how they look. I don't want them to look like aesthetics are important for me. All of my ships are going to have a defined role. There's not going to be really any multi-role ships in the fleet. Everything's going to have, you do this, you do this, you do this. We have a significant budget thanks to my previous win. We're going to utilize that to the max to make sure this fleet is good. The fleet's objectives that it needs to complete. It needs to be able to take on, it basically needs to hunt down and destroy strike fleets without taking any losses. It needs to be able to swiftly and efficiently take fleet HQs. It needs to be able to locate and recruit as many Tarkans as quickly as possible, and it needs to stay silent. Those are the 4 main objectives. So we need heavy hitters, we need the ability to search, and we need the ability to stay quiet. Our main problems that we're going to face going into this campaign are, I haven't played in the 1.14 meta, and there's a lot going on in there. We have to deal with the 1.13 meta that's been grandfathered in, and there's some significant changes to how we play the game based off that. And we have to be very careful of failure cascades. Failure cascades being situations where our ships run out of morale and we can't get them to fight anymore, and I've lost a campaign for that before, or we end up out of position and we just get nuked into oblivion, or we run out of money and we crash into the desert out of fuel. We have to watch out for all of those things. Main things to take away from the 1.14 meta from what I know so far: you can no longer elevate engines. You can no longer elevate guns as well as you could. You can still do it, I believe, but it's very, very difficult. I'm going to do some experimenting for that. Engines are much more expensive. Certain pieces of hull and armor are more expensive as well and harder to mount. It's going to get harder to build ships that are compact and fast thanks to these changes. That's not the end of the world. It just means we've got to change how we think about things and look at it from a different angle. It's a challenge, not a problem. We also have to remember that we're dealing with what got changed to 1.13 as well. Enemies can now use proximity fuse and armor piercing ammo. So players who build ships that are either unarmored or overly armored will be punished. There's a small typo there, but whatever. Small ships with no armor will die very quickly. Armor is heavier and more expensive. We have to think about all of this when we're designing our ships. So I want to make sure that I'm building a robust fleet with a variety of roles in it. I know I've used the word multi-role there, but each ship in the fleet will have one role to it most, but the fleet itself will have multiple capabilities, and they need to be able to thrive in this new environment, which is different from what we just played through. So the ship design methodology that I'm going to be thinking about when I start building these ships is the ships that are in our fleet, again, have to have defined roles. And we want to take the best parts of our high-performing ships from the previous campaign and bring them into the new campaign as the kind of DNA that we're building our ships out of. So we need to make sure that we've got ships that can operate independently from the main fleet. We need to utilize passive sensors to find our enemies. I want strike ships that are only going to be doing strikes, which is something I'm already quite good at. And I want support ships that can do multiple things. So I know I said before, single roll. That's for strike ships. My support ships need to have multiple jobs. I don't want another Fennec situation where I have a ship that basically has one job in the fleet and it doesn't do it very, very well. And then I want to, my main way of attacking is a combined arms situation. I want close-in fighters that hit enemies that have already been softened up with aircraft and strategic missiles. So my initial proposal for the fleet that I want to build is starting off with a fast carrier flagship. That's not the final design in the picture, that's just an example. I want a carrier flagship that is fast and agile, so it's able to redeploy and move around the map at a reasonable speed. Obviously, it needs to be able to deploy aircraft. I want it to be a large tanker for the fleet as well, so that our support fleet doesn't need its own tankers attached to it. The carrier can deal with that. I'm not going to design it to fight on the front line at all, which is going to save us a lot of weight and make sure that we can get this ship pushing the speed a lot higher. If this ship gets engaged in close combat, we've basically lost the campaign. That's not my end state. If you think of the Sevastopol as a battleship in World War II, then our new carrier flagship is going to be a submarine. It's going to operate under the radar, it's going to deal with enemies from a long distance, and it's not going to be found. So I want to build a true Lightning 2.0 for this campaign. I'm going to really push that 700 kilometers per hour speed. That's where I want to target it at. And I want it to move around the map very quickly at the start, take on garrisons on its own, get us some money, get us some sensor data, get us information. I want at least 2 DAT models on it, probably some 37mm on it as well. It's going to use flares to help it deal with missiles, maybe some Palash if I can get my hands on it, and I need it to be prox fuse resistant as well. There's no way I'm going to make this ship armored enough to be able to just not worry about taking damage from prox fuse. The size of the ship and the speed that I'm targeting, it's going to have some flaws. But we'll have to make some compromises to get what we want, and I'm just going to have to fight over where exactly we're going to lose something, maybe some armor or a little bit of speed to get it to the right stage. Working with the Lightning 2.0, I want a Skylark 2.0. I want to try and really push its speed so it can hit the 700 kilometers per hour to keep up with the Lightning 2.0 so they can really work at a high speed. One of the issues, small issue, but at the start of the old campaign, the Lightnings outsped the Skylarks by quite a lot, so the Skylarks were constantly playing catch up. It wasn't the end of the world, but I want to get rid of that issue. I want it to be covered in passive sensors that makes sense, so that it can act as my silent eyes and ears as my Lightnings spread out across the map. I possibly want to include the cheaper fire control radar on these ships as well, so that I can use them to guide in missiles, especially A100s, which is something I want to make more use of in this campaign. I'm also wondering if I want to put a jammer on it, or I want a separate ship that has a jammer that I can use to lure an enemy away from me. The next ship I'm proposing is a Paladin 3.0. I want a heavy hitter for the mid to end game of the campaign. I want a ship that's well protected, has superior firepower, uses flares and Palash, and just does what our Paladin did at the end of this previous campaign, but better. So that's another ship I want to design and have with us from the start. There are a couple of additional things I just want to quickly talk about. I also want to design some sort of missile carrier, something that's fast, has some A100s on it, maybe flies around with the main fleet, maybe it has its own little support fleet. I'm still spitballing how I want that to go. I want to look at crybaby ships. I talked about that last time. It's not a design I have come up with, but people in the community have designed ships that basically just carry a radar and a jammer, or just a jammer, and they fly them away from their main fleet, activate that jammer, and try to attract the enemy towards them away from their main fleet by making a lot of noise. I definitely want to use more laser-guided ammo. I was very impressed with it at the end of the campaign, and I definitely want to use more incendiary ammo as well. A lot of these big capital ships that we're struggling with have big fuel tanks. Setting those on fire can be really powerful, and we ended up with so much incendiary ammo at the end of the campaign because I wasn't using it. That's really everything that I wanted to go through in this after action report. I have some other videos I want to do on this. I'm kind of waiting for 1.14 to come out, but I am going to start messing around with the beta patch. I will start doing my ship design videos once I'm a bit more comfortable with it. If you have any comments about what I've just gone through, any questions, any notes that you want to add on, any observations that you've got, please don't hesitate to make a comment. I'm hoping that people have noticed that I'm trying to reply to every comment that comes into my videos at the moment. I might not do it straight away, but I will reply to your comment, and I'm finding the insight that I'm getting from people watching my videos to be really, really valuable. And honestly, it makes my day every time I get a comment. So if there's something you want to add to this, something you want to point out, something you don't agree with, please let me know. I will happily talk to you about it in the comments. Unfortunately, the Reddit for this game has kind of died, which is really a shame. But yeah, let's get some conversation going. Until our next video though, I really appreciate you watching this. I know it's a bit of a different video from me, but I want to do the content that I want to do, and I like the idea of doing after action reports and stuff like this. So until the next video, I'll catch you later. But for now, thank you very much for watching, and have a good day.